Okay, 7th graders who are reading Johnny Tremain. First of all, impressive. This is a tough book. It's a classic though, and it's a really good book. There are lots of difficult words, but we'll get through it. I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I'm going to work through it with you, or at least try my best. I want you to know, because it's a longer book and because it's more difficult, this book, it's going to take us probably more than 3 weeks, but it's also going to count for 2 reading counts tests. So if you're one who's worried about your next reading counts book, which I don't think any of you who are reading Johnny Tremain are, but if you are, or you're worried about the next one after the next one, Johnny Tremain will count for 2 reading counts books. So do not fret about that. As we work through this novel, like all the other historical fiction novels that 7th graders are doing, there's a couple things we're going to focus on. Vocabulary is going to be one. Another one is we're going to learn about the Revolutionary War by reading a historical fiction novel. So there are things we're going to pull out and then do some more research on. We're going to focus on characters and how the characters interact with each other. As we get into Johnny Tremain, there are a lot of characters, and it gets confusing. So I recommend that you get a note card, a Post-it, piece of paper or something, and especially at the beginning, you write down the names of the characters, and just a brief description. So you can maybe use that as your bookmark and then look at it when you're maybe confused about a character or before you start to read. Another thing we're going to focus on kind of throughout or at the end of the historical fiction unit is what makes up a historical fiction novel, and how does the book we're reading, Johnny Tremain, how does it classify then as a historical fiction novel? Okay, all of you are strong readers, so I am probably not going to read a lot of the book to you or with you, but to get us started, I want us to read together for chapter 1, or at least part of it. So, if you will, turn to page 1, Johnny Tremain. On rocky islands, gulls spoke. Time to be about their business. Silently they floated in on the town, but when their icy eyes sighted the first dead fish, first bits of garbage about the ships and wharves, they began to scream and quarrel. The cocks in Boston backyards had long before cried the coming of day. Now the hens were also awake, scratching, clucking, laying eggs. Cats in malt houses, granaries, shipholds, mansions, and hovels caught a last mouse, settled down to wash their fur and sleep. Cats did not work by day. In stables, horses shook their halters and whinnied. In barns, cows lowed to be milked. Boston slowly opened its eyes, stretched, and woke. The sun struck in horizontally from the east, flashing upon weather vanes, brass cocks and arrows. Here, the glass-eyed Indian. There, the copper grasshopper. And the bells in the steeples cling-clang, telling the people it was time to be up and about. In hundreds of homes, sleepy women woke sleepier children. Get up and get to work, Ephraim. Get to the pump. Fetch mother water. Anne, get to the barn. Milk the cow and drive her to the common. Start the fire, Silas. Put on a clean shirt, James. Dolly, if you aren't up before I count 10. And so in a crooked little house at the head of Hancock's Wharf on crowded Fish Street, Mrs. Lapham stood at the foot of a ladder leading to the attic where her father-in-law's apprentices slept. These boys were luckier than most apprentices. Their master was too feeble to climb ladders, the middle-aged mistress too stout. It was only her bellows that could penetrate to their quarters, not her heavy hands. Boys? No answer. Dove? Coming, ma'am. Dove turned over for one more snooze. Frustrated, she shook the ladder. She was too heavy to climb. She wished she could shake them limbs of Satan. Dusty Miller, let me hear your voice. Here it is. piped Dusty pertly. Her voice changed to pleading. "Johnny, you get them 2 lazy lug-a-beds up. Get them down here. You pull that worthless dove right out of her bed. You give Dusty a kick for me. I'm waiting for him to fetch fresh water so as I can get on with breakfast." Johnny Tremain was on his feet. He did not bother to answer his mistress. He turned to the fat, pale, almost white-haired boy, still wallowing in bed. "Hear that, Dove? Oh, you heave me leg, can't you?" Grumbling, he swung his legs out of the bed the 3 boys shared. Johnny was already in his leather breeches, pulling on his coarse shirt, tucking in the tails. He was a rather skinny boy, neither large nor small for 14. He had a thin, sleep-flushed face, light eyes, a wry mouth, and fair lank hair. Although 2 years younger than this swinish dove, inches shorter, pounds lighter, he knew, and old Mr. Lapham knew, busy Mrs. Lapham and her 4 daughters, and Dove and Dusty also knew, that Johnny Tremain was boss of the attic, and almost of the house. Dusty Miller was 11. It was easy for Johnny to say, "Look sharp, Dusty," and little Dusty looked sharp. But Dove, his first name had long ago been forgotten, hated the way the younger apprentice lorded it over him, telling him when to go to bed, when to get up, criticizing his work in the silversmith shop as though he were already a mastersmith. Hadn't he been working 4 years for Mr. Lapham, and Johnny only 2? Why did the boy have to be so infernally smart with his hands and his tongue? "Look here, Johnny, I'm not getting up because you tell me to. I'm getting up because Mrs. Lapham tells me to." "All right," said Johnny blandly, "just so you're up." There was only one window in the attic. Johnny always stood before it as he dressed. He liked his view down the length of Hancock's Wharf, counting houses, shops, stores, sail lofts, and one great ship after another, home again after their voyaging, content as cows waiting to be milked. He watched the gulls, so fierce and beautiful, fighting and screaming among the ships. Behind the wharf was the sea and the rocky island where gulls nested. He knew to the fraction of a moment how long it would take the 2 other boys to get into the clothes. Swinging about, he leaped from the head of the ladder, hardly looking where he went. One of Dove's big feet got there first. Johnny stumbled, caught himself, and swung silently about at Dove. "Gosh, Johnny, I'm sorry," snickered Dove. "Sorry, eh? You're going to be a lot sorrier." "I just didn't notice." "You do that again, and I'll beat you up again. You overgrown pig of a louse, you—" He went on from there. Mr. Lapham was strict about his boys swearing, but Johnny could get along very well without. Whatever a pig of a louse was, it did describe the whitish, flaccid, parasitic dove. Little Dusty froze as the older boys quarreled. He knew Johnny could beat up Dove any time he chose. He worshipped Johnny, and he did not like Dove. But he and Dove were bound together by their common servitude to Johnny's autocratic rule. Half of Dusty sympathized with one boy, half of him with the other, and the squirrel. It seemed to him that everybody liked Johnny. Old Mr. Lapham because he was so clever at his work, Mrs. Lapham because he was so reliable, the 4 Lapham girls because he sassed them so, and then grinned. Most of the boys in the other shops around Hancock's Wharf liked Johnny, although some of them fought him on sight. Only Dove hated him. Sometimes he would get Dusty in a corner, tell him in a hoarse whisper how he was going to get a pair of scissors and cut out Johnny Tremain's heart. But he never dared do more than trip him and then whine out of it. "Some day," said Johnny, his good nature restored, "I'll kill you, Dove. In the meantime, you have your uses. You get out the buckets and run to North Square and fetch back drinking water." The Laphams were on the edge of the sea. Their well was brackish. "Look here, Mrs. Lapham said Dusty was to go in." "Get along with you. Don't you go arguing with me." Fetching water, sweeping, helping in the kitchen, tending the Niling furnace in the shop were the unskilled work the boys did. Already Johnny was so useful at his bench, he could never be spared for such labor. It was over a year since he had carried charcoal or a bucket of water, touched a broom, or helped Mrs. Lapham brew ale. His ability made him semi-sacred. He knew his power and reveled in it. He could have easily made friends with stupid Dove, but Dove was lonely and admired Johnny as well as envied him. Johnny preferred to bully him. Johnny, followed by his subdued slaves, slipped down the ladder with an easy flop. To his left was Mr. Lapham's bedroom. The door was closed. Old Master did not go to work these days until after breakfast. Starting the boys off, getting things going, he left to his bustling daughter-in-law. Johnny knew the old man, whom he liked, was already up and dressed. He took this time every day to read the Bible. To his right, the only other bedroom was open. It was here Mrs. Lapham slept, with her 4 poor fatherless girls, as she called them. The 2 biggest and most capable were already in the kitchen helping their mother. Scylla was sitting on the edge of one of the unmade beds, brushing Asana's hair. It was wonderful hair, seemingly spun out of gold. It was the most wonderful thing in the whole house. Gently, Scylla brushed and brushed, her little oddly shaped face turned away, pretending she did not know that Johnny was there. He knew neither Scylla nor Asana would politely wish him the conventional good morning. He was lingering for his morning insult. Scylla never lifted her eyes as she put down her brush, and very deliberately picked up a hair ribbon. Laphams couldn't afford such luxuries, but somehow Scylla always managed to keep her little sister in hair ribbons. Very carefully, she began to tie the child's halo of pale curls. She spoke to Asana in so low a voice it was almost a whisper. "There goes the wonderful Johnny Tremain." Asana took her cue, already so excited she was jumping up and down. "Johnny worth his weight in gold, Tremain." "If you don't think he is wonderful, ask him, Asana." "Oh, just how wonderful are you, Johnny?" Johnny said nothing, stood there, and grinned. The 2 youngest Laphams were always insulting him, not only about how smart he was, but how smart he thought he was. He didn't care. Every now and then they would say something that irritated him, and then together they would shout, "Johnny's mad!" As an apprentice, he was little more than a slave until he had served his master 7 years. He had no wages. The very clothes upon his back belonged to his master. But he did not, as he himself said, take much. There were only 4 real rooms in the Lapham house, the 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, the kitchen, and the workshop on the 1st. Johnny paused in the lower entry. In the kitchen he could see his formidable mistress, bent double over the hearth. Madge, in time, would look like her mother, but at 18 she was handsome, in a coarse-grained, red-faced, thick-waisted way. Dorcas was 16, built like Madge, but not so loud-voiced nor as roughly good-natured. Poor Dorcas thirsted for elegance. She would rub flour on her face, trying to look pale, like the fashionable ladies she saw in the street. She wore her clothes so tight, hoping to look urethral. She looked apoplectic. How they all had laughed when her stays burst in the middle of meeting with a loud pop. She did not call her mother Ma, but Mother, or respected Mother, and in her efforts to avoid the rough, easy speech of her associates on Hancock's Wharf, she talked, when she remembered it, in a painfully prissy proper way. Johnny thought Madge pretty bad, and Dorcas even worse, but he was philosophical about them. He wouldn't mind having them for sisters. They certainly were good hard workers, except when Dorcas tried too hard to be elegant.